Let's jump right into this explainer. To really understand modern Britain, you've got to look back to the ashes of 1945. You see, this isn't just a simple story of people moving from point A to point B. It's this incredible clash of new laws, absolute desperate necessity, and the feeding echoes of an empire, all coming together to completely rebuild a nation. We're talking about the history of the Windrush generation, a massive demographic shift that literally redefined the UK's cultural and economic landscape.
So, think about this for a second. We're starting our chronological journey in 1945 with a really striking historical paradox. Why on earth would a country actively encourage mass migration right after a devastating global war? Common sense kind of tells you that a bruised, battered nation would just instinctively close its doors, right? Turn inward to heal. But actually, the reality of Britain's desperate post-war situation forces us to look at a very different and quite surprising truth.
By 1945, Britain was, quite frankly, on its knees. It desperately needed rebuilding. I want you to imagine the country as this massive, intricate industrial machine that had just been pushed way, way beyond its limits for 6 agonizing years. Transport networks were totally decimated, industry had ground to a halt, the economy was heavily battered. The aftermath of the war left this gaping wound in the nation's infrastructure, and the country literally had to be physically put back together, brick by brick, railway by railway. But here was the huge, insurmountable roadblock: a massive, crippling labor shortage. The physical infrastructure was waiting to be rebuilt, but the hands needed to actually heal the country, to drive the trains, staff the hospital wards, run the factories. They were just missing. After 6 years of devastating military and civilian casualties, the jobs were absolutely there, but the physical workforce simply wasn't. The nation's vital machinery was paralyzed just by a sheer lack of human capital. This entire era was defined by widespread acute desperation. The government launched massive recruitment campaigns at home just to keep basic public services from totally collapsing. They even tried initiatives like the European Volunteer Worker Scheme, but it just wasn't enough. Britain quickly realized the domestic hole was way too vast to fill. To save their most critical institutions, they had to cast their net across the oceans and look far beyond their immediate borders. To solve this unprecedented crisis, the government turned its eyes to the Commonwealth realm. Britain looked towards citizens in nations that had deep historical, colonial links to the British Empire. We're talking territories spanning everywhere from Jamaica to Canada to Australia. These populations were essentially envisioned as the new lifeblood, the absolute key to sustaining and driving the mother country's post-war recovery. And the resulting pull factor? Well, it was undeniable. For so many people living in the Commonwealth, the lure of guaranteed steady employment was deeply mixed with a really strong, ingrained patriotic call to help rebuild the empire's epicenter. Britain was essentially broadcasting a clear, unequivocal message across the globe. We need you. This promise of prosperity, combined with a sense of duty, acted like a giant magnet across the Atlantic. But at the exact same time, there were some really powerful push forces at play back in the colonies. Places like the Caribbean were dealing with severe post-war economic stagnation, very limited local opportunities, and stubbornly high unemployment. This created an intense push to leave. So you have this historic intersection, right? A powerful push away from economic hardship at home, meeting an unprecedented pull toward guaranteed work abroad. It completely set the stage for a monumental demographic shift. Now, obviously, populations can't just traverse the globe in such extraordinary numbers without some sort of robust legal framework to make it happen. So Parliament constructed a legal bridge across the Atlantic with a really landmark piece of legislation. This wasn't just a friendly invitation, it was a sweeping mandate, literally enshrined in law, that would forever alter the very definition of British identity. The true catalyst here was the British Nationality Act of 1948. This monumental law legally designated all Commonwealth citizens as full citizens of the United Kingdom and colonies. And this is absolutely crucial. This was not some temporary visa program or a fleeting guest worker scheme. No, it granted an absolute, irrevocable right to migrate, settle, and work freely. It essentially erased the borders between the United Kingdom and its colonial territories overnight. Let's look at how fast this historical momentum actually builds. You go from the desperate realization of severe labor shortages in 1945 to this expansive legal framework established in 1948. That foundation securely paved the way for one single defining event that very same year.
an event that would immediately capture the public's imagination and permanently give a name to an entire generation of pioneers. The sheer scale of this moment is just breathtaking. In June of 1948, the passenger liner Empire Windrush dropped anchor at Tilbury Docks in Essex. Aboard were hundreds of Caribbean migrants stepping out onto the decks, directly answering the mother country's desperate call. This vessel instantly became the enduring symbol of post-war migration, forever immortalizing these arrivals as the Windrush generation.
Now, it's absolutely vital to understand that this arrival wasn't some kind of accident, and it certainly wasn't uninvited. It was the direct result of active, highly coordinated recruitment by the British government to inject vitality back into the nation's faltering infrastructure. Official campaigns echoed all across the Caribbean, strategically targeting skilled laborers, mechanics, and nurses to fulfill Britain's most critical vacancies. And upon arrival, these new citizens seamlessly became the very backbone of a recovering nation. They took on incredibly essential roles. They became the ubiquitous, everyday faces of London transport, working as drivers and conductors. They staffed the wards of the newly formed National Health Service, providing critical care when it was needed the most, and they powered the industrial sectors. Without their hands, Britain's post-war recovery might have just stalled completely. When we pull all of this together and synthesize this chapter of history, a really clear trajectory emerges. The severe labor shortage acted as the economic cause, forcing this desperate recruitment effort. Then, the 1948 Nationality Act served as the legal catalyst, legally opening up those global pathways. And finally, the arrival of the Empire Windrush stands as the profound societal consequence. Together, these intersecting elements literally birthed the foundations of a modern, incredibly diverse Britain. As we consider the lasting legacy of the Windrush generation, we're left with a really complex historical question to chew on. Was this foundational shift in British society driven by the patriotic obligations of an empire opening its arms to its citizens? Or was it driven by the desperate survival instinct and sheer economic need of a wounded post-war nation? It's a massive question. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history around you.